I'd now like to ask Paula Lowndes to come up. Paula is the Vice President for Canada at A-in-chut, and A-in-chut has kindly sponsored today's lunch and clearly our luncheon keynote speaker, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and I'm going to ask Paula to introduce him. Thank you very much.
Hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Growing up in the Australian outback, I never imagined that I'd be standing up here in such esteemed company. And as Vice President of A-in-chut, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this session. National Chief Shawn Atleo is a hereditary chief from the Household First Nation. In July 2012, Mr. Atleo was elected to a second consecutive 3-year mandate as National Chief to the Assembly of First Nations, advancing a vision of supporting and enabling the success of every First Nation on the basis of their rights and responsibilities. National Chief Atleo and the National Executive have taken a forward and bold plan of action engagements with all sections of Canadian society. Education is at a top priority for the National Assembly, and Chief Atleo has been a tireless advocate by spending time in First Nations in every region of the country, with federal, provincial and territorial leaders, and with the national and international audiences. In 2008, Chief Atleo's commitment to education was recognised in his appointment as Chancellor of Vancouver Island University, becoming BC's first Indigenous Chancellor. He has been honoured to receive several honorary Doctorate of Law degrees from universities throughout Canada. In February 2012, he was awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for his advocacy work on behalf of First Nations across Canada. Chief Atleo began his career as a facilitator, trainer and entrepreneur working with and for First Nations peoples. He holds a Master's of Education from the University of Sydney, Australia, in partnership with the University of BC, the University of Western Cape, South Africa, and the University of Linköping, Sweden. Traditional teachings have guided Chief Atleo to serve First Nations as a leader, facilitator, mediator, planner, and teacher. Please join me in welcoming Chief Shawn Atleo.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that very, very kind introduction. It turns out, as you can hear by the accent, that she comes from Australia originally, and we are both alum of the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. What's the chances that we would be connecting in a moment like this? And I'll share a little bit about, for me, the importance of that link with the university in a moment, and to me how it connects with this conversation here today. I want to thank the Canadian Council for this invitation. In my language, chu tleko, atuk shit si hotway hixo, Mississauga of the New Credit. In the way of my people, I come from, as you so well described, my village of Ahousaht, good pronunciation on my language, a little fishing village on an island off the west coast of Vancouver Island, as far west really as you can go on the continent. As is our way, we always recognize the First Nations in the territory with whom we're conducting our business. And so I do so here today in my language, one of 52 Indigenous languages across Canada. I wanted to, I guess, talk a little bit about our conversation over lunch, about this Masters of Education that I took in partnership with the University of British Columbia, universities in Sweden and South Africa. I mention it because this program was so incredibly unique. And it afforded an individual like me in this little village off the West Coast. It was an online program. And I did all of my work and was involved in jointly developing papers for discussion and getting into debates, all on dial-up. You remember dial-up? And to think that as a kid in my village that we had the crank phones. And the speed with which this change has come, the program, was a master's in adult learning and global change, Masters of Education. And I recall so very well taking this program because the 11th day was September 11th. And the strange sounds of jets flying over my little village, because they don't belong there, that's not normally where they fly. Having this discussion with learners in a township, in a little township outside of Cape Town, where they were sharing one single computer, with my cohort in Australia, for whom I'm forever indebted, to learn about the experience of the Indigenous peoples and visit the Redfern district right there in Sydney, and the folk school learners in Sweden. And to have this experience in a location where I was executive director of a First Nations Family Addictions Treatment Center, where families were coming together to really come out from underneath the ravages of the social ills that were so true in my lifetime, in my community, and which we still, in many communities, are challenged by. And that program offered me this tremendous sense of hope. Because my father was one of the first, if not the first, to achieve an academic doctorate degree in the history of my little village, as well as our tribe, possibly in British Columbia, and was acknowledged as such at the University of British Columbia. So this is all in a relatively short period of time, this brief snapshot of history that makes me feel so particularly full of gratitude to be welcomed into your midst, to talk about partnerships, to talk about ways in which we can come together and solve the challenges that we are all faced by. And in the time since I've taken that program, I've felt so enriched at the opportunities and education is afforded, just as it was my father's experience, being the first to really pave the way. And he was encouraged by his late mother, my late grandmother, to say that for so long, our people have been fighters, and we fought our fights with our fists. And my grandmother said, "Grandson, we fight our fights now with education." And so it is there that I begin with explaining the context within which I might find myself as I, like you, perhaps shake the head every once in a while. How is it that I ended up in the work that I'm doing? And why is it the Premier would help us reflect? Why are we doing the jobs that we're doing? And what is it that we so deeply desire? And for me, there is no question that based on the inspiration of people like my late grandmother and the leadership and fortitude of people like my father, who attended residential schools. And when I think about Australia, we think about the Rabbit-Proof Fence, very famous movie about Australian experiences. And I hear that there's representatives from New Zealand. And I think about that the First Nations experience here in Canada is not necessarily dissimilar from, and we can relate to the Indigenous people's experiences around the world. So I do believe and want to begin with this notion that your invitation of me here suggests that Canada can and is poised to demonstrate leadership in accepting that we've inherited some challenges and a legacy that no one in this room created, but we're deciding at this juncture that we have a moment of reckoning. And so it's with that I really deeply express my appreciation to you. These challenges are very real. When I hear the Premier reflect back on the progress that's been made, we can see as well that some progress has been made. We can see innovation that I will touch on. I also know that as I stand before you in places like northern Manitoba, I visited not that long ago, spent time with a 10-year-old. Well, actually, he's closer to my height. I was going to go like this, closer to my height. Spent time with a young man, And just speaking with him about his life, his aspirations, he was so excited because his grandpa is proud of how well he's doing in school, that he's got homework to do, and you could just see, as we all just so want to see, that spark of life in a human being, particularly in our families and the young ones that I know many of you are mentors and care and love for, and that's what I saw in this young man. He didn't necessarily sense the way I didn't sense as a child, that he is also living in the depths of the deepest poverty that is a reality right now. Slop pails I walked by on the front porch to come to his front entrance. He's living with aunts and uncles, 12 people in a 30 by 25 foot one-room home with no electricity. And yet you can see this spark, though. Not necessarily as a child recognizing, as I know now what I didn't know then, that perhaps that we have these tremendous challenges around us, and yet we're rich with family, and we're rich with, right now, a sense of strength, of the resilience of what we've come through. And that, I can suggest, is where First Nations feel today. Tremendous challenges, and yet feeling strong and proud for what we've come through. And I'm very hopeful, and I see this hope in my own children who have gone and pursued their education and are bringing their passion and the skills that they've learned, spending times in rooms like this, developing networks and forging partnerships, that we're beginning to pick up on the vision that our collective ancestors forged when this country was put together in the very beginning. The idea of the forging of treaties has been a reality over the course of our history. And in fact, next year, 2013, will mark the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation, one of the very first expressions of mutual recognition and respect. And I know that we're here talking about practical responses to challenges for things like infrastructure, and there certainly is tremendous challenges. And your theme fits so closely with our work and the manner in which we wish to proceed. That's the power in partnership. First Nations need basic infrastructure, absolutely, to continue to improve our communities. And at a time when building new infrastructure is an economic priority for this country, we also need to see concrete investments to ensure that we're not left behind. I'm very honored to share this stage with the likes of the Premier, and I know Minister Flaherty was one as well. And in the Premier's remarks, you may have noted the reflection on the relationship to the infrastructure challenges and needs and the responses of provincial governments and or, in comparison to, perhaps, that of the responses of the federal government. And so First Nations, being 633 communities in every pocket of this country, in every corner of Canada, finds ourselves having inherited a challenge where we have a principal relationship with the federal government. And yet so often the infrastructure policy reflections and suggestions for response and implementation, there can be disparate approaches. And my hope and interest is that in a room like this, with experience and depth and compassion and interest, the likes of which is demonstrated in a room like this, that we can begin to forge those partnerships and begin to look for solutions. I know Mr. Flaherty said that Canada's resource industries offer huge potential to create even more jobs and growth, now and over the next generation. This potential exists in every region of the country: natural gas in British Columbia, oil and minerals on the prairies, the Ring of Fire in Ontario, Plan Nord in Quebec, hydropower in Atlantic Canada, and mining in Canada's north. And I think about that reflection and the emphasis on natural resource and its potential here in Canada. And then I go back to my little village, fishing village. We're now 1,000 strong in Ahousaht. And we had, not that long ago, an incredible proposal for a major mine development. Not something that us as a fishing people necessarily know a whole lot about. And we still have outstanding challenges between the interest and development of these resources and the need to reconcile the relationship between First Nations and Canada in a real way. And there is a tremendous overlap between the natural resource development aspirations of the country. First Nations share an interest in building our economies and creating jobs, as well as arriving at a sense of business certainty. And we have many individuals who are incredibly active and demonstrating leadership. I want to acknowledge Clint Davis, who is with us as one of the key sponsors of this event, and also the former CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. Clint, I want to acknowledge and thank you for your leadership in bringing Indigenous peoples together with the business community. It's that kind of vigorous engagement and the suggestion that we're in this together that is absolutely required at this juncture. Some of the examples that are, I know, at the top of heart and mind include Ring of Fire chromite mine development as a potential major contributor to the provincial and national economies. That potential will only be realized as increasingly commentators are recognizing, the Canadian Council of Chief Executives being one recent major, I think, contributor to this discussion, along with many others. This potential will only be realized if First Nations, as has been said, if we're full partners. There are a number of factors that will impact the ability for First Nations governments to build, operate, and maintain complex infrastructure that is a requirement as well to support the building of our economies. Remoteness is something that is brought up all the time. But Shawn, some of these communities are far or fly-in communities, only accessible in the winter, when the winter roads, when there's freeze up, in order to get supplies in and out. Remoteness is often reflected as one of the major challenges. It should be, I think, made very clear, and I was in Niskanaga just a couple of weeks ago, a fly-in community up in northern Ontario that was gathering around the issue of one of the major social challenges, social ills, prescription drug abuse, deep concerns. And a parallel conversation that the leadership and the people were engaged in was how to connect with and contemplate the resource development in the region. And so in my role as National Chief, my job is to support and advocate for First Nations and to ask for us to consider how we might link the natural resource development aspirations of First Nations, the challenge in this outstanding relationship and the need to build real partnerships, and the real challenges that communities face today, like that 10-year-old in the home in northern Manitoba, or this community in northern Ontario that is striving for a better day and wants to support their young people, as any of us do in our families and our communities, and is reaching out. And that is, I think, part of my responsibility here today, is not just to paint this picture, but also to suggest and invite ways forward. Demographics. We have the fastest growing segment of the Canadian population at a time when the mainstream population is aging rapidly and moving towards retirement. And the country's wondering, how is it we're going to pay for health care and support for the aged over the course of the future? I've got my hands up going, we are an incredibly fast-growing demographic. Over half of our population are under the age of 25, making me now one of the old-timers amongst the First Nations of Canada at 45. My own kids at 23 and 26, my son, it struck me like a thunderbolt when I sat in a political meeting on the West Coast, and he's our youngest ever elected council member. Gone away to get his education and gone home to bring his sense of commitment to lifting up our people and our nations. And I have a tremendous amount of hope, particularly in the young people. The lack of financing and matching some of these opportunities, our demographics, with the kind of training that they require. And challenges working with the Department of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development and their funding model. So it isn't just the point that the Premier made about the infrastructure investment in a province like Ontario versus or as compared to a federal investment. It's the fact that, as I said earlier, First Nations have a primary relationship as articulated through the archaic Indian Act that we all agree, and for those who perhaps recall that we met with the Prime Minister and a good portion of Cabinet last January, where he described the Indian Act as having being something with deep roots, something that we have to pull out, and I described it as a boulder in the road, and maybe that's a bit analogous to the need to dig in deep and say that we have all of us inherited this Indian Act that is not producing the kinds of results in a moment like this, when in a region like Ontario, when our young people, that fast-growing demographic, are more apt right now statistically to end up incarcerated than to graduate from high school. And that's the reason for the need to vigorously move into this area, respond to supporting that incredible human potential. And so we will stand with communities like those in Northern Ontario and those in Northern Manitoba and the remote areas, as well as our people who are in the urban centers. And we know that this notion of pursuing development, that very often there is a notion that First Nations do not support development. First Nations do support development, just not development at any cost, and in a manner that works for our populations, where it is about the people and about them having a say. And this was the idea of treaties from the very beginning of the formation of this country. They were absolutely social, yes, they were political, but make no question about it, it was about an economic vision as well. It was about sharing in the benefit and the wealth of the territories that we share. And I'm speaking right now about Treaty 9 in the northern parts of this province. And the communities are the first to reflect on the changes in the environment, that those winter roads that they need so desperately to get building materials, for example, in and out of the communities, they're seeing a shorter time when those roads are actually open so that they can get the materials in and out. This again creates new cost pressures and sometimes frustratingly for those communities, why isn't it that you just don't move and go to an urban setting? And so the challenge is, of course, that we've got these unmet needs. We've got the need for over 80,000 homes. We've got over 100 communities on boil water advisories right now. So there is a tremendous challenge that we are facing right now, and real critical infrastructure needs in our communities, not only in the areas I've mentioned, but roads, bridges, community buildings, for example, community centers, arenas, drop-in centers, and fire halls. And so it is extremely difficult then, faced with these challenges, to attract investment to build our economies. And so really there's four, I think, principal points of entry that I want to highlight, the first of which is to invest in our young people. Let's support the education and training of this fastest growing demographic. I'm standing before you as one who has experienced that kind of support, and I'm extremely thankful for it, and it allowed me to bring that to my own home community. We need to invest in grid projects for roads and electrical power lines. We need to, and I know that chiefs are working on major wind energy projects, and they're gaining greater acceptance, as well as housing, not only as a social challenge and need, but as a business, partnering with investors for large-scale housing builds, as well as regional housing authorities and entities. I know that there is examples that I can point to of the kind of innovation that we need more of. On Georgian Bay, the Henvey Inlet First Nation, about 200 kilometers from here, was able to raise enough private funding from foreign lenders and major banks to build a $1 billion wind farm, as just one such example. So not necessarily because of the supports, in fact, overcoming, and despite the lack of the supports. At this juncture in history, I feel so strongly that we are in need of smashing the status quo in the relationship between First Nations and Canada, and making sure that we bring focus and attention on what the reality of that 10-year-old is in northern Manitoba, as well as those individuals that find themselves in the urban centers like Toronto and Winnipeg. There's close to 2,000 First Nations displaced living in the city of Winnipeg because their communities are completely destroyed by flooding. And it's a 100-year-old challenge. It's a 100-year-old issue that really will call on us to agree and decide that we will dig in at this juncture in history, that we might not have created these conditions, but the future of the relationship, and in fact, in my opinion here today, the economic future of the country will rely heavily on us coming together. We've heard from Natural Resource Canada that there's at least 500 major natural resource projects that will account for $600 billion in economic development over the next decade. And like in Neskantaga and northern Manitoba, every major natural resource project that's being proposed is adjacent to or within a First Nations territory. And so we've arrived at a place with the need to reconcile the relationship, which is why we called for the First Nations Crown Gathering this last January, and let's put the relationship back, as your theme suggests here, on a full partnership foundation. That First Nations in this country have rights. They're confirmed in the Canadian Constitution. They've been updated in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that says First Nations have a right to free, prior, and informed consent to design their lives and to design the way forward, for education, for child welfare, for housing, for economic development, and to help shape a sustainable future. So this is about determining that a shared sense of responsibility, as well as a shared determination to get it right, because we have inherited a very deep and dark and difficult shadow, one that was marked when the Prime Minister stood up in 2008 and apologized to my late grandmother, whom I referenced earlier, and said to her and the 7 generations of those who went to residential school, the country was wrong. That under the guise of education, that there would be a formal policy to pull children out of their homes and send them away to residential schools and seek to take that connection away. We can turn this around, and we can do it in this generation. It's going to be an effort that's going to require real partnerships. And we can build the kind of workforce that we know the country is requiring, and chiefs continue to hear the announcements about the need in major resource development, areas like mining, of the need to attract talent from overseas. And we continue to suggest strongly, let's look at the talent that is right here within the boundaries of Canada and work to eliminate poverty in the communities that I represent. If we were to do so, to close the education gap, to close the skill gap, in one generation, this would add $400 billion in additional contribution to Canada's GDP. It would save $115 billion in government expenditures. So not only are we looking at a linkage between the natural resource economic development aspirations of the country, I believe we're looking at bringing the kind of efficiency and practical response that will benefit all. I feel that this is an exciting moment that we're in, not without its challenges, because believe you me, First Nations who find themselves in the kinds of conditions that reflect some of the very worst are deeply frustrated. I believe that it's a moment of reckoning. It's a moment not marked necessarily by a single day or a single week, but we are in a time right now where we can, if we choose, tackle these challenges with all of our might. Bring all of our intelligence and compassion, bring the experience to bear, and know that we may not be able to undo the mistakes of the past, but we can use our present well. This is the hope that First Nations find themselves grasping onto and saying, let's reach out to Canadians. Our relationships can be so difficult, as articulated through a single policy forged over 100 years ago with the single government. And there are more than just the federal government that we're interacting with. If it's a ring of fire, then we're interacting with Premier McGuinty's government. Natural resources, not only domestic governments, we're interacting with the countries overseas, like Asia, where I've spent time traveling, meeting with the indigenous populations there, or in China, meeting with both business leaders as well as the indigenous populations there. There is a moment that Canada can grasp to demonstrate leadership in reconciling old challenges, in digging deep into some of the policy areas like infrastructure, being innovative, the likes of which I've seen in Manitoba, the very same region that I've mentioned for the 10-year-old. There is triple P initiatives. There's 4 schools being built. There's private equity being brought to bear. In Australia, I've heard of good news of the efforts and the results in social impact bonds, where governments are asked to join in, but only after private equity has been initiated, results are demonstrated, and governments then provide that support. There is new innovation that we are seeing. We still are deeply challenged by some of the legislative and policy approaches of the past, that ongoing unilateral approach that we've seen ever since the bringing in of the Indian Act. Capital investment is absolutely necessary. And so more and more, we're going to be looking for the wide variety of ways to solve these needs, and we'll continue to be unrelenting in pursuing a better relationship with the federal government. I believe that after several centuries of struggle and strife, that now is the time for our peoples to strengthen our cultures, and we will do so, to build and strengthen our economies and invest in our young people, and we will do so, and rebuild our nations. And it starts with building and enhancing partnerships with you. The very foundation of the relationship, after all, as Black Elk said, is about relationships. It's our responsibility in life to strengthen, maintain, and uphold them. For we all have a role to play. And as was said right here in Ontario, we're all here to stay. True. Tleko, tleko. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much, National Chief Atleo. It's a very thoughtful and thought-provoking remarks. And I know that it'll give all of us something to think about. I was particularly taken by the phrase of smashing the status quo. That's really important. And while I don't want to oversimplify it, much of what we do in this area of trying to advance an agenda around public-private partnerships is much about smashing a bit of the status quo. But I was very impressed with your remarks and your outline of where the infrastructure needs are, where the capital needs are. And I think I speak on behalf of the Council for sure and our members. One, obviously, there'll be very sincere interest in fact, partnering with First Nations communities across Canada. But more importantly, I think the Council itself would welcome the opportunity to partner with you and your colleagues in order to realize an agenda that would really help you advance the objectives that you laid out so effectively here. So I thank you for those remarks, and I appreciate you accepting our invitation today. And in recognition of your being here today, we have made a small contribution to Habitat for Humanity on behalf of your participation. So thank you again for that. So please join me in thanking one more time Chief Atleo. Just a couple of other items on the agenda. First of all, the Council did have its annual general meeting this morning, at which time the new board of the Council was elected. And I just wanted to take a moment to let you know who's on the board now, and to have the board members who have been able to join us today please stand up as a group, and then we'll recognize you in its entirety. Mark Bain, Fred Blaney, Rick Byers, Sarah Clark, Jack Davis, Richard Fife, Nick Hahn, Emilio Imbriglio, Don Casian, Mike Marasco, John MacArthur, Larry McCabe, David McFadden, Joanne Mullen, Dave Podmore, Bob Park, Rob Penny, Jay Ramatar, Cynthia Robertson, Lou Serafini, Jeff Smith, Gord Wilcox, and of course, the chair of our board, Dale Richmond. Would you all please stand? Thank you very much. I'd also like to take this opportunity to formally thank 6 members of our board who have stepped down this year: Bob Beaumont, Jim Burke, Duncan Hawthorne, Tim Philpotts, Guy Chouanière, and Daniel Johnson. We very much appreciate their service. The only point I would make is that once in the CCPPP web, there ain't no getting out. So they'll stay part of the team. There is, after lunch, there are a couple more breakout sessions that will round out the program. One on recent US projects and lessons learned for Canada, and another one on finding common ground on risk assessment, which I hope you'll attend. And then after that, we'll complete the day with a cocktail reception at 3:45, which is sponsored by Stikeman Elliott LLP. And as I say, I hope you'll remain there for that. The last item on my agenda, frankly, should have been the first item on the agenda, because it is, in fact, what's most on my mind, and that is to take a moment to thank those in the Council who have worked so hard to enable us to have these 2 days of what I believe is a very successful conference. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Carla Walmsley, Raheel Raza, Christian Bauer, Pegeen Walsh, Jeff Bowden, Michelle Connolly, who was very effective in securing sponsorships from all of you, Lisa Zavodzin, and the Congress Canada team. Please join me in thanking those individuals. None of them are in the room because they're off organizing the remainder of this program. But I hope you will mention to them when you see them that they've done a great job. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the day. And this is the last time we'll see each other formally. So please enjoy it. And hopefully we'll actually see you informally at the reception tonight. Thank you again.